Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of China Now, the only show dedicated to providing the world with a global overview of today's China. Here on the show, we tell you not only about how China works, but how it thinks and how it views itself and the rest of the world. My name is Makiza Latifa. So for today's episode, we begin with Top Picks with Derek, which is a segment focused on bringing you top trending news in China. This episode features Israel's recent pager attack, which threatens global supply chain security. Let's get started.
Welcome to Topics, your daily news related to China. I'm Derek. On 18th of September, a new wave of a remote exploding attack blasted in Lebanon, which was widely believed to be carried out by Israel, has killed at least 20 people and nearly 450 wounded. According to Al Jazeera, several blasts took place simultaneously, which were similar to the explosions on Tuesday, but the second round was mostly related to walkie-talkies or radios. Lebanon's state news agency said some of the explosions occurred in a brand of two-way radio, with images from the scenes showing walkie-talkies labeled with Icon and made in Japan. Icon is a Japanese manufacturer of wireless communication equipment producing amateur radios and navigation products. Its products are sold in more than 80 countries around the world, with subsidiaries in the US, Australia, Germany, and Spain. According to the company, it has also supplied electronics gear to public safety organizations and the U.S. Department of Defense and the Marine Corps. A statement on the company's website said that the ICVA-2 handheld radio was produced from 2004 to 2024 and exported to overseas markets, including in the Middle East. The company also emphasized that its products were sold overseas only to its authorized distributors, in line with Japanese government regulations. When it comes to the device that exploded in Lebanon, Icon explained those devices were not fixed with a counterfeit prevention sticker, making it hard to confirm whether they were produced in Japan. However, the company refused to specify how it determined that radios did not have the label. Both Hezbollah and the Lebanese government accused Israel of making these attacks. Israel has not yet directly commented on the blasts, but the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said in a speaking to Israel soldiers on Wednesday that Israel is at the start of a new phase in the war. Despite no mention of the explosions of electronic devices in Lebanon, Gallant praised the work of Israel's army and security agencies, noting the results are very impressive. The U.S. denied having any pre-knowledge about the blasts. However, according to Reuters, a U.S. official speaking on condition of anonymity stated that Israel told Washington on Tuesday it was going to do something in Lebanon. The exact cause of the explosions remains unknown, but several analysts have suggested that the supply chain of the devices was tampered with or manipulated before reaching Lebanon. Bomb disposal specialist Chris Hunter told Al Jazeera that Israel may have gained access to the supplier. In a letter to the UN Security Council, Lebanon's mission to the United Nations reported that a preliminary investigation by Lebanese authorities found that the communication devices involved in the blasts had explosives planted in them before they arrived in Lebanon. Interestingly, in 2020, the US had led a so-called Clean Network initiative against China, which says it seeks to eliminate the long-term threat to data privacy, security, and human rights posed to the free world from the authoritarian malign actors. According to the State Department's website, Israel, Japan, and the Taiwan authorities are still among U.S. partners in this initiative. However, the latest attack makes Chinese people doubt whether a pair of dirty hands can really clean the internet.
And that was a really in-depth explanation and coverage of the topic. Thank you, Derek. Now let's turn our attention to China Currents with Lisa, which is your weekly news report on what's happening in China. In this episode, Lisa will break down into detail Lebanon's pager attack, which is seemingly affecting the sales of iPhone in China. The recently concluded 47th WorldSkills competition, which was held in France, where China claimed the top spot by winning 36 gold, 9 silver, and 4 bronze medals, as well as other very interesting topics. Please keep watching for more details.
China Current is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started.
Welcome to China Currents, your weekly news report on what's happening in China. I'm Lisa. In this episode, in Egypt, American fighter jets lost to China's. Lebanon pager attacks affect iPhone sales in China. Taiwan hacker army won the Chinese netizens' laughter with a hilarious performance. Chinese workers prove they are the best in France. First, let's focus on the latest achievement of China's arms sales. According to Chinese media, the paper, on the 16th of September, the Egyptian Air Force will purchase Chinese fighter jets to replace Americans' F-16. The Egyptian Air Force plans to purchase the J-10C fighter jet produced by China's Chengdu Aircraft Industry Group. The aircraft can carry 5,600 kilograms of either missiles and bombs and can fly at a maximum speed of 1.8 Mach. Its combat radius is 550 kilometers, while the direct distance between Cairo and Tel Aviv is 402 kilometers. This means that if Israel has an air show, Egypt's J-10C would only need 11 minutes to get there. While Egypt's specific procurement quantity has not been disclosed, Voice of America claimed that China is expanding and targeting the Middle East regional market. However, according to information disclosed by other American media, the Middle East regional market is evidently being messed up by Americans' unreasonable pricing strategy. In fact, the Egyptian Air Force operates 220 F-16s, making it the fourth largest F-16 operator in the world. Washington had offered Cairo the upgraded F-16V, but the price of it was unreasonably expensive. For example, the US once sold 66 of them to Taiwan Island for $8 billion, which means each fighter jet cost $121 million. In contrast, Pakistan signed a $1.4 billion deal with China in 2009 to buy reported 36 J-10Bs, with a unit price of only $39 million. Compared to the products that the US is trying to sell to Egypt, Chinese fighter jets are not only half the price but also perform better. As BulgarianMilitary.com reported, the J-10C offers superior combat capabilities compared to the enhanced F-16 model, or at a comparable cost. Military Watch magazine also reported that the close to 200 F-16s that form the backbone of the fleet are considered among the least capable fourth-generation fighters in the world, and have been heavily downgraded and restricted to using obsolete Cold War-era weaponry, and no beyond visual range air-to-surface weapons whatsoever. In fact, the F-16 is an excellent fighter jet that has been tested in actual combat. However, due to relations with Israel, the US has imposed varying degrees of air combat capability restrictions on the products sold to Egypt, preventing them from posing a significant threat to the Israeli Air Force. For example, they refused to sell the AIM-120 missile, which should originally have been paired with the F-16. This means that Egyptian pilots must rely on AIM-7 missiles with a range of less than 70 kilometers, while Israeli pilots have missiles with at least 105 kilometers range. On the other hand, China's J-10C fighter jet can carry the PL-15 missile, which would allow pilots to strike enemies 300 kilometers away. And the relations between China and Israel is obviously not as close as that between the US. According to the Eurasian Times, China is also promoting its latest stealth fighter jet, the FC-31, to the global market, which has gathered attention in the Middle East. With the American F-35, Israel is currently the only country in the Middle East with stealth fighter jet. However, how long this advantage will last is uncertain. Next up, let's turn our attention to Lebanon, which had a profound impact on Chinese customers. On the 17th of September, hundreds of pagers in Lebanon simultaneously exploded by remote. 12 people have been confirmed dead, including an 8-year-old girl. and 2,750 more have been injured, including the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon. The pager involved in explosions belonged to a Taiwanese manufacturer called Apollo, and their products have been sold 260,000 units in the US and Australia in the past 2 years. A second wave of remote exploding occurred just a day after the first blast, which killed at least 20 people and nearly 450 wounded. According to Al Jazeera, several blasts took place simultaneously, similar to the explosion on the 17th, but the second round was mostly related to walkie-talkies, which were labeled with a Japanese manufacturer, Icon. The New York Times reported that Israel's intelligence agency Mossad allegedly hid explosives inside the pages, later triggering the explosion remotely. The operation may have been going on for several months and involved at least 5,000 pages. The exact cause of the explosion remains unknown, but several analysts have suggested that the supply chain of the devices was tampered with or manipulated before reaching Lebanon. Bombs disposal specialist Chris Hunter told Al Jazeera that Israel may have gained access to the supplier. The pager attack sparked concerns about the security of supply chain on Chinese internet. In 2020, the US led a so-called Clean Network initiative against China, especially Chinese technology giant Huawei, which says it seeks to eliminate the long-term threat to data privacy, security, and human rights posed to the free world from authoritarian malign actors. According to the State Department's website, Israel, Japan, and Taiwan authorities are all among the US partners in this initiative. The recent pager attacks have led many in China to question whether US and its allies are really endangering the global supply chain by pushing Chinese products out of the market. On China's largest social media platform Weibo, Xiang Ligang, a blogger with 1.6 million followers, commented that the pager attacks have seriously undermined the credibility of electronic devices worldwide. He noted that many people in China are now questioning the security of products like iPhone and Tesla. Several days after Apple released its latest iPhone, both Pinduoduo, Chinese Temu, and Taobao, the two largest e-commerce platforms in China, have slapped a 4% discount on the high-end iPhone 16 Pro Max, which only came out for 3 days in China. For Chinese consumers, iPhones usually sell out immediately upon release. People queue up and even had to pay extras to scalpers to buy them. Things are changing. Next up, a Taiwanese hacker group were caught by mainland China. On the 23rd of September, China's Ministry of State Security exposed a Taiwanese hacker group specializing in fabricating fake news. Originally, their mission was to hack into the websites of universities and airlines in mainland China to steal confidential data and to spread misleading information through bot accounts, and they unsurprisingly failed. The hacker group, named Anonymous 64, is led by members of Taiwan's Cyber Army, established in June 2017 by Taiwanese authorities. Interestingly, the Taiwanese government denies any involvement. This group operates an X account where they boldly claim to have hacked the official website of 40 mainland Chinese universities and frequently posted images of hacking mainland China's digital billboards and internet television to spread hate speech. In their propaganda, they portrayed mainland China's cybersecurity as highly vulnerable. However, according to the investigation by China's Ministry of State Security, the images they posed were fake and edited by Photoshop, and the hacked university website were counterfeit replicas with no actual user traffic. Despite their largely unsuccessful hacking attempts, the group successfully exposed their whereabouts. China's Ministry of State Security accurately identified 3 active Taiwanese military personnel involved in the project: Luo Junming, Hong Liqi, and Liao Weilun. While this marks their first successful entry into a general mainland Chinese official website. Next, on the 15th of September, the 47th WorldSkills competition concluded in France. China claimed the top spot in the event, winning 36 gold, 9 silver, and 4 bronze medals. Chinese workers have won gold medals in projects such as aircraft maintenance, automotive technology, autonomous mobile robots, 3D digital gaming art, and cooking. Known as the Olympics for Workers, the week-long competition brought together over 1,600 workers from 69 countries and regions. The players competed across 59 skill disciplines within 6 major categories, including construction, arts, communication, manufacturing, transportation, and services. Workers from Singapore, Thailand, and Indonesia also pulled off amazing results in fields like information technology and engineering. South Africa also sent 26 workers to compete in events related to renewable energy and auto body repair. In fact, outside the competition, Chinese workers also remained close ties with their fellow athletes. Under the Belt and Road Initiative, the Luban Workshop, a vocational education and training network developed by China, allowed workers across Africa and Asia to learn skills from each other. According to the South China Morning Post, there are 33 new Luban Workshops across 29 Asia and Africa countries. It was a scheme that was first launched in Thailand in 2016. According to the Chinese Ministry of Education, more than 22,000 students have received vocational training there, with more than 10,000 have gone on to graduate with degrees from affiliated universities. China's main foreign aid agency recently said the Ethiopian Luban Workshop based in Addis Ababa has been designed as a high-quality skills training center for the entire African continent by the African Union headquarters. Despite the Luban workshops providing a valuable platform for global workers to exchange technologies and improve vocational training, some Western outlets have cast doubts on its intentions. The Washington Post, for example, suggested that the Luban workshops serve China's ideological goals, drawing parallel to the Confucius Institute, which have also faced criticisms and suspicion from the West. At the closing ceremony, Lyon handed over the flag to Shanghai as the host of the 48th WorldSkills competition. Let us wish workers from every country good results in the next competition. And that is all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Current. If you have any thoughts or comments about our show, please reach us at the email address below. And we look forward to hearing from you and see you next time.
And that does it for China Currents. Next on the show is the Thinkers Forum, and we are honored to have the director of the Transnational Foundation for Peace and Future Research, Jan Oberg, with this explainer on why the Western powers and its formidable military strength have failed to bring peace to the world, regardless of its establishment of about 850 military bases worldwide and the expansion of NATO to the borders of Russia under the banner of counter-terrorism and maintaining world security.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
Oh my God. That shit was a fucking bomb.
Now, if you go to 9/11, it was a lousy conflict analysis because everybody asked, how was it done and who did it? The attack, on World Trade Center and Pentagon. And the third one was meant to be the White House, but the plane crashed. They did not ask, why was it done? And so if you don't ask why, you cannot solve the problem. But that was not the intention for the US. The US wanted to exploit that victimhood and I'm not underestimating it, but 3,000 people, less than 3,000 people were killed on 9/11/2001. Majority of which, or at least half of which, were not American citizens, but people who sat from all over the world in the World Trade Center. So, with due respect to every life that cost, the United States decided to exploit that situation for saying, now we're going to have a global war on terror. The GWOT, the Global War on Terror.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
That means wherever we think that the guys who did this came from, we are going to bomb and occupy. So on the 7th of October, they invaded Afghanistan. And so over the time, these 23 years, figures from Brown University and elsewhere in the US and other statistics have it that somewhere between 1 and 5 million people have lost their lives as part of the GWOT, the Global War on Terror, that the US started and still has running. So instead of asking, why did they take the financial center of the world, the military center of the world, Pentagon, and the political center of the world, namely the White House, which was telling, they didn't bomb any kind of, museum building or hospital or something. They took the 3 centers at that time. That should have been a message to someone. If you had read bin Laden's book, he starts out saying that the West has done enormous harm, not the least mass killing people in the East, by which he referred to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So long story short, you overreact because you consider yourself a victim. Namely, you try to kill terrorists and say that thereby you will fight terrorism. That's not the way it works, because when you kill terrorists in the Middle East, Al-Qaeda or Al-Nusra, whatever, and by the way, the West has cooperated with a lot of them, for instance, in Aleppo in Syria, I've seen it myself. When you go for killing people, you don't solve the problem. What you should do is to ask yourself, why do people become terrorists? And when you have talked with terrorists and found out what their criticism and grievances are, how they feel marginalized, and why they use violence to get attention, then you begin to have a sense of what can be done. And I think that has been a devastating development for the Western world. The fighting after 9/11 all around the world by the US has contributed to making the US a more hated and having a more negative image than it otherwise would have had. That goes together with all the wars the US has lost. There's no wars it has won since Vietnam. It's lost all the wars, morally, politically, legally. The strong country, the strong society in which is one in which your different elements of power are balanced equally much. A strong economy, strong political status, strong culture, strong social patterns, cohesion, strong legal power and legitimacy in the eyes of others. Now, if all these are sinking, but there's one you have, and that is the military power, you become a kind of drug addict, in this case, a weapons or militarism addict. And you will militarize yourself to death. Because the reason you have all this military is that you've taken the power from the economic power, the political power, the cultural power, and invested that in your military and warfare capacity. And the bottom of that, the basis that should carry this, is becoming smaller and smaller. And the West at the moment is the best at military power. It is declining in economic power, it's declining in political power, it's declining in cultural power, it's declining in trade, it's declining in global legitimacy. But the one thing the Americans and NATO can say is, we're strong, we can do things. Now, they lost all the wars since Vietnam, but put that aside, there's still, we can blow you up if you don't behave like we want you to behave. That's what happens at the moment because of this militarization against Russia, which is perverse because Russia was already a dwarf before all this started. Russia had 8% of NATO's military expenditures. Excuse me, nobody with 8%, 8 horses, does not start a war against somebody who has 100 horses. So this whole thing is fantasy. It is a way to legitimate your own, or cover up your own blunder called Ukraine membership of NATO. If you ask me why NATO is spreading, it's because our leaders in the West believe that we're number one, we're second to none in the military sphere. That means you will see all problems around you as something that can be solved by weapons, by means of weapons or more weapons. That's why diplomacy has basically disappeared. That's why economic sustainability, underlying defense has disappeared. That's why you don't care anymore about whether the rest of the world finds your policy is legitimate. And that's why you fight to preserve what you think you can preserve while everything else is falling apart. It takes no intelligence to start a war. It takes a lot of knowledge and intelligence to stop a war and create peace. And that's why I say there is a connection between intellectual and moral disarmament in the West. It doesn't matter anymore. We don't do diplomacy anymore. We don't take the other into account. We don't go for common security. We don't go for disarmament anymore. We don't respect the UN Charter because it's easier not to and just send some weapons. You see, the response from the West and NATO countries has been all the time, send more weapons. What do we do at the moment? The totally intellectually indefensible position, and the presidential candidates in the US have it and built on it. We want a ceasefire while we pump in weapons and ammunition to Israel. Does that make sense? I think a child can see that that is stupid and doesn't make sense. I think there is a clear connection between militarism, armament, just hammering, when you have a problem, whereas you need intellectual rearmament and moral rearmament if you want to solve conflicts the productive and lasting sustainable way. It cannot be done by weapons, I'm sorry. And so this kind of intelligent conflict resolution is over. It's not used anymore. When I say these things here in the West, they say, oh, that's very idealist. I don't know where it happens, but I think it had to do with the fact that the Soviet Union broke down. Warsaw Pact disappeared, and then you could do anything you liked. There was a free world for the West in 20 years where you could start any war, you could bomb here and there. There was no Soviet Union that could prevent it. There was no China that could prevent it. There was nobody else who could prevent it. Now, let me give you a personal experience that I had in the 80s. I'm that old. Our colleagues, me and my colleagues, were working for the Swedish Foreign Ministry, writing reports, doing conceptual analysis, what is deterrence in psychological, political, and moral terms, and things like that. And they would get the material, and they would then say, come up that and that day, and we will go through your text, and we have a lot of questions to you. Why? Because Sweden needed, as a non-aligned, to a certain extent, neutral country to develop its own policies and be unique, because it did not just call Brussels or Washington, what shall we do? It had to, because it had its own policy, it had to be very, very solidly based in knowledge and clear concepts. Now, that's not the Sweden today. The Sweden today is a foreign policy that is completely in the interest of the United States. As a member of NATO, it has no independent foreign policy anymore. In my view, you could just as well close down the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, apart from ambassadors around the world, that's nice. And it is a total de-intellectualization. It's a foreign policy and security policy formulated without you needing any knowledge. Because you get the inspiration, the words, even the Twitter statements for press conferences, you get them through the Western influence. That's how Sweden, where I come from or live in, I've seen this, setting up of not only NATO membership, but 17, I said 17, American military bases on Swedish territory, 15 in Finland, 3 in Denmark, and 4 or 5 in Norway, and more than 40 bases in 1 year set up in what used to be a peaceful corner of the world. Not only NATO membership, but bilateral agreements about bases that will be under American jurisdiction, where, for instance, the sovereign state of Sweden has abdicated parts of its independence and sovereignty and given it to the United States. For what reason? For being used if there is a conflict with Russia. Not that we have something that we can contribute, not something that NATO is interested in, not something the Western world could make good means of, such as a mediation capacity, such as a strong disarmament policy, such as an inspirational UN relationship. We don't have it. We have nothing to give anymore. You can add to that, Ukraine with NATO expansion is a factor that makes the West go down, because everybody who is not NATO can see that NATO was a main conflict creator until Russia, unfortunately, and I would say not very productively, invaded Ukraine. And then you had Nord Stream, and now you have the genocide in Gaza. All these things are contributing to undermining the authority and credibility and legitimacy in the rest of the world's eyes of the United States and the Western world, NATO and the European Union. I have never been anti-Western or anti-American, but I feel it's painful to see how nobody is threatening the West. But thanks to its own confrontational policy, its own militarism, its own, we can do nothing wrong, the hubris, we are demolishing ourselves in the West. I think that's very sad, and I wish there would be some leadership somewhere in the West who could say, hey, we've got to find out before it's too late. It has all the time been, we're doing nothing wrong. It's the others who are foolish or dangerous or a challenge. We keep on doing what we want. We step up what we do, not seeing that what they do has been self-destructive. And that's intellectually, it's disarmament, while you promote rearmament with military means. And that's very sad to see for those of us living in the West.
Very interesting facts and revelations right there. But let's continue the show with the global arena featuring Charles Liu, a senior fellow at the Taihei Institute. His first submission centers on Turkey's interest in joining BRICS. According to him, this does not necessarily translate into Turkey taking sides either with China or Russia, but rather he describes it as the country's common sense of exercising their sovereignty and wanting to improve its relations with the global south.
A spokesman of the Turkish government has announced that Turkey is thinking of joining BRICS, or BRICS Plus as it stands now, because now it's more than the 5 original countries. And this is fascinating because for Turkey, which has been seeking to join the EU for a long time, has had problems. But it's also a member of NATO, a member of the US military alliance, is now seeking to join BRICS. Now, what does this mean? Of course, the US would not be very happy, because for Turkey, a member of NATO to join BRICS is clearly taking a stance for and with the global south. I think what we have is a situation in which countries, independent and sovereign states, are seeking the best for their countries, the best for their people. And it seems that participation in NATO does not seem to measure up in terms of improving the lives of the people of Turkey. But joining BRICS may actually help in promoting South-South collaboration and promoting better trade, better financial terms, better everything among the members of BRICS. And given the fact that BRICS is now talking about a settlement currency for members of BRICS, starting with its settlement in local currencies, but possibly a BRICS currency for trade settlement, which will all be very helpful to BRICS members, and other financial institutions being established, BRICS Bank, BRICS development institutions. All of this would be quite meaningful for Turkey. I think these are real things, concrete things, much more than the imaginary enemies that NATO gets together to fight against. For the West, there's a concern that this taking a position on wanting to join BRICS, not only by Turkey but many others, is actually siding with China, siding with Russia. Now, this is absolutely ridiculous because BRICS was something that was created by a Goldman Sachs banker. Brazil, India, Russia, China, and South Africa. It just happened that BRICS sounded good. It is not a political or a geopolitical formation. It's just that these 5 countries at the head of the state level decided that it would be interesting to have a collaborative effort along the lines of these 5 countries' interests. And that's why it was formed. And then they found there are lots of commonalities in terms of what they have to deal with, in terms of their development efforts. So they worked along those lines. Now, very good. Many other developing countries discovered this is very helpful and hence decided to join and actively participate. And this is why Turkey is now seeking to join. It has nothing to do with taking the side of China or taking the side of Russia. It's just common sense of exercising your sovereignty in wanting to improve your relations with other global South countries, improve trade, improve the livelihood of our people. I think the way things are moving is not just Turkey, but others will probably be joining. But the way things are going, BRICS Plus will become quite an entity, quite a sizable entity very soon. But it's a good thing. It's a good thing where the Global South collaboratively try to accelerate their development efforts and improve the lives of their people.
And next on the global arena, Charles Liu speaks on racial discrimination in the United States and the ill fate suffered by many Asian Americans, specifically of Chinese descent, in that regard.
A few weeks ago, a researcher, very well known, actually, neuroscientist, Dr. Wu Ying, committed suicide. And the National Institute of Health formally declared that many of the researchers have found that there have been discriminatory practices and really a lot of emotional and psychological pressure on Asian Americans, especially those of the Chinese descent. This is nothing new. We've known that this has been happening after Donald Trump, while he was president, launched a program to target Asian American, especially Chinese Americans, for national security reasons, quote unquote. And thereafter, there have been other legislation in US Congress targeting the same, and even more ridiculous, targeting the Chinese government in terms of whether or not they had influence over researchers to capture US information or science and technology secrets. Now, for someone who's been, I guess, subject to the same thing more than 50 years ago, I can actually talk quite a bit about this because I remember the days of Martin Luther King, Reverend Martin Luther King leading demonstrations for civil rights against discrimination. I remember in 1968, the massive march on Washington. At that time, America talks about everybody being equal, human rights for all, and so on and so forth. But sorry, the N-word, you go to the back of the bus, or you don't even get a seating. And the N-word was prevalent all over, and it was commonly used. But it's nothing new for Asian Americans either, because at that same period, during that same period, you had many expressions used, derogatory expressions used against Asian Americans. Many of you probably have not heard of the expressions used at that time. And I was subject to exactly that. That continued on until today, but now it's become an international thing. It's China, 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 Chinese Communist Party. But behind it all, underneath it all, is still racism and discrimination. A couple of years ago, fellow alumni of my alma mater, Princeton University, was putting together a scholarship fund for Chinese students to study at Princeton. And eventually, the thing was dropped because we were told, let's not say by whom, but let's say by university officials, that there is a discriminatory practice against foreign students from China, where FBI required reports on a regular basis on their activities. And even university officials were unhappy about what they had to do and were absolutely outraged by the discriminatory practices being imposed on them by the US government. Of course, we know that this US government has now other regulations coming out that, oh, come and study in the US, pay full tuition, but don't touch the sciences. You can study the non-science subjects. It's really amazing when you think about it. I think back 50 years, more than 50 years ago, when Dr. Martin Luther King and against the war in Vietnam and demonstrations against the bombings in Cambodia and so on and so forth, going back over 50 years. And now the very same, however under a different guise, is now being practiced as racial discrimination seems to be so deeply ingrained in this country of the US that all the talk about equality and the human rights and so on and so forth just seems so hypocritical.
And here's where we part ways on today's edition of your favorite news and current affairs talk show, China Now. Through this show, we are hoping to show you a different world, a different culture, and a different way of thinking. Don't forget to send in your comments, thought, feedback, and suggestions through the email provided below. My name is Makiza Latifa, and I will see you same time next week.